In Bangkok's Rajadamnern Stadium, a brash young Muay Thai champion was about to test his arrogance against the weight of history. What began as a showcase of tradition turned deadly when the undefeated prodigy mocked a legend and demanded a fight. Chuck Norris wasn't your typical ringside celebrity. For decades, he was a martial arts icon, a world karate champion, and a cinematic warrior known for precision and control. His roundhouse kick whispered of discipline, honed over a lifetime. When the arrogant fighter called him out before thousands, he had no idea he was inviting judgment from a master. Chuck rose with calm finality, and his first silent steps toward the ring carried more weight than a dozen victories. What followed was a measured response that would shatter pride, humble a nation's champion, and ignite a global firestorm online. What began as a youthful display of mockery would become a lesson in respect. The stadium, and the millions who watched, would never forget the night arrogance met legend, and the first kick ended it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Rajadamnern Stadium pulsed with life on this humid Bangkok evening, a cauldron of noise and anticipation. Flags from dozens of nations fluttered in the rafters. Cameras flashed like lightning bugs, and the scent of incense mingled with sweat. Tonight was special, the Global Muay Thai Showcase, bringing together legends and rising stars under one roof. The energy surged through the packed arena like electricity, thousands of voices merging into a single roaring entity. Nok Von Priya, the arena's veteran announcer, leaned into her microphone. Her voice soared above the tumult with practiced precision. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we witness the collision of generations, the wisdom of experience against the fire of youth. She paused, letting the crowd's roar swell before continuing. Tonight, we celebrate the art that has defined Thailand for centuries. Near the front row, untouched by the chaos around him, sat Chuck Norris. At 78, his presence carried the quiet weight of mountains. He wore a simple black button-down shirt, his weathered hands resting comfortably on his knees. Unlike the celebrities and dignitaries surrounding him who chatted and posed for photos, Chuck sat in contemplative silence, his gaze steady, focused on the ring where the ancient art would soon unfold. A young Thai fan nearby nudged his friend, pointing. "That's him. Chuck Norris," he whispered reverently. "He looks so normal." His friend replied, disappointment edging his voice. "That's the point," the first fan said. "The truly dangerous ones never need to show it." The house lights dimmed suddenly, and spotlights swirled across the arena. The crowd's roar shifted to an expectant hush as traditional Thai music filled the space, the haunting sounds of the keen pipes setting the stage for what was to come. Entering the ring first, Nok announced, her voice thick with respect. "A man who has honored our traditions for 3 decades. The former champion who has represented Thailand across the globe. The teacher of champions and guardian of our heritage, Somsak the Bull Chanarong." The crowd rose in respectful applause as an older fighter emerged. At 45, Somsak moved with the deliberate grace of a man who had made peace with time's passage. His face bore the maps of 100 battles, a crooked nose that had been broken multiple times, scar tissue around his eyes, and ears that had thickened from years of punishment. Yet he carried himself with unmistakable dignity, performing the traditional Muay crew ritual with slow, precise movements that spoke of decades of discipline. Chuck leaned forward slightly, the first change in his posture since sitting down. His eyes followed Somsak's ritual with quiet appreciation, one master recognizing another. "And his opponent," Nok continued, her tone shifting subtly. "The undefeated rising star of Thailand, the fastest fighter in Asia, the man they call Lightning, Thanchai Jaruan." The arena lights flashed in rapid succession as trap music suddenly blasted through the speakers. A young fighter bounded into view, draped in a glittering robe emblazoned with lightning bolts. At 23, Thanchai possessed the perfect blend of speed, power, and dangerous confidence that made champions. His body was a lean sculpture of muscle, unmarked by serious damage, his movements explosive even in his entrance. Rather than performing the traditional Y crew with reverence, Thanchai rushed through a flashy version, incorporating breakdance moves that drew whoops and cheers from younger fans. He played to the crowd constantly, pointing at his supporters, blowing kisses to women at ringside, and flashing a brilliant smile that had already earned him sponsorship deals across Asia. As the referee called both men to center ring for instructions, the contrast couldn't have been starker. Somsak nodded respectfully, hands in the traditional Y gesture. Thanchai bounced on his toes, winking at the cameras, barely listening to the referee. "You should have stayed retired, old man," Thanchai muttered in Thai, just loud enough for Somsak to hear, but not the officials. Somsak's expression never changed. "Let your skills speak," he replied simply. "Oh, they will," Thanchai smirked, loudly. From his seat, Chuck watched the exchange, reading the body language like a book. His eyes narrowed slightly, the only indication that he registered the disrespect unfolding. The bell rang, its metallic song cutting through the arena's buzz. Somsak moved forward in the traditional stance, balanced and measured. Thanchai, however, exploded from his corner with frightening speed, immediately pressing forward with a barrage of strikes that forced the older fighter back toward the ropes. "Look at that speed," Nok called out, professional excitement in her voice. "Lightning living up to his name." The crowd roared as Thanchai landed a crisp combination jab, cross, leg kick that clearly rattled Somsak. The veteran recovered quickly, settling into his defensive shell, looking to weather the early storm, as he had done countless times before. He blocked a high kick, countered with a solid right hand that momentarily slowed Thanchai's advance. But the young fighter simply smiled, shaking off the blow. "That all you got?" he taunted in Thai, loud enough for the front rows to hear. In that moment, something flickered across Somsak's face. Not fear, but a sad recognition. The realization that time waits for no warrior. That the speed of youth eventually outraces even the most perfect technique. Thanchai pressed his advantage, his strikes a blur of precision and power. A leaping knee caught Somsak flush on the chin, staggering him. The crowd gasped collectively. Instead of moving in to finish, Thanchai backed away, circling, playing with his prey. He glanced toward the VIP section, making sure the celebrities were watching his performance. His eyes paused momentarily on Chuck Norris, whose expression remained impassive, evaluating. Something about that steady gaze bothered Thanchai, like an itch he couldn't scratch. He turned his attention back to Somsak with renewed aggression. "Your generation is finished," Thanchai hissed as they clinched briefly. "Watch how it's done now." Somsak didn't respond, conserving his energy, looking for openings that were closing faster than they had in his prime. He landed a counter elbow that opened a small cut above Thanchai's eye, a moral victory that proved fleeting. Thanchai wiped away the blood, his smile transforming into something colder. He nodded as if making a decision, then unleashed a combination of strikes so fast they seemed to blur together: right kick to the leg, left punch to the body, right elbow arcing towards Somsak's temple. The veteran slipped the elbow but walked directly into a high kick that he never saw coming. The impact echoed through the arena, a sickening thud that brought the crowd to its feet in shock. Somsak crumpled to the canvas, his body suddenly limp. The referee rushed in, waving his arms to stop the fight, even as Thanchai prepared to pounce on his fallen opponent. Medical staff swarmed the ring, oxygen mask in hand, the crowd's excitement giving way to concerned murmurs as Somsak remained motionless. Chuck Norris stood slightly, concerned briefly, crossing his features before returning to their customary calm. He watched intently as the medical team worked, not sitting again until Somsak's eyes fluttered open. Meanwhile, Thanchai strutted around the ring, arms raised high, playing to the crowd as if a man wasn't being treated for a traumatic brain injury mere feet away. When he saw that Somsak had regained consciousness, instead of showing relief, he pointed and laughed. "Who's next?" he shouted in English, making sure the international audience understood. "This is what happens when dinosaurs don't stay extinct." The crowd's reaction split, younger fans cheering wildly for their new hero, older spectators shifting uncomfortably, exchanging troubled glances. This wasn't the way of Muay Thai, wasn't the respect the art demanded. But Thanchai didn't seem to care. As Somsak was helped carefully from the ring, leaning heavily on the medical staff, Thanchai grabbed the microphone from the announcer's hand. "That's how we do it in 2025, he shouted, voice echoing through the arena. "No more old styles, no more boring tradition. This is fighting for the new world." His eyes scanned the crowd, feeding off their energy, until they locked once more on Chuck Norris, who had returned to his seated position, expression unreadable. In that moment, something sparked in Thanchai, a need to conquer this final symbol of the old guard. Here was Chuck Norris, the legend, watching him with those calm eyes that showed neither approval nor condemnation. It bothered him more than he could explain. In the arena's growing tumult, as fans argued among themselves about the display they'd just witnessed, Chuck sat in perfect stillness, an island of calm in a sea of chaos. His weathered hands rested lightly on his knees, his breathing unchanged despite the violence he'd just witnessed. And though no one could have known it then, in that quiet moment before the storm, the real fight of the night was about to begin. Blood streaked the canvas in thin crimson trails where Somsak had fallen. Arena staff hurriedly wiped it away, but not before Thanchai had tracked through it during his victory lap, leaving red footprints like some primitive war dance. The older fighter was now behind a curtain in the medical area, surrounded by concerned faces and the beeping of monitoring equipment. The hush that had fallen after his collapse was rapidly giving way to the arena's renewed energy as Thanchai continued to work the crowd. "Let's hear it for the future," he shouted into the microphone he'd commandeered from Nock. "Let's hear it for real fighting." Many in the crowd responded enthusiastically, particularly the younger fans who had come to see spectacle rather than tradition. Phones remained raised high, capturing every moment of Thanchai's celebration, ensuring his performance would flood social media within minutes. "That's 25 straight wins," Thanchai continued, pacing the ring like a caged predator. "No one touches lightning. No one gets close." Behind him, in the VIP section, Chuck Norris remained motionless. Unlike those around him who were either cheering wildly or turning away in disgust, Chuck simply observed. His eyes tracked Thanchai's movement with the assessment of a man who had seen thousands of fighters come and go across decades. Thanchai caught that steady gaze again and faltered mid-sentence. Something about the older man's calm scrutiny needled him, worked beneath his skin like a splinter. In all his previous victories, opponents, coaches, and mentors had shown clear emotions: anger, frustration, sometimes begrudging respect. But Chuck's face revealed nothing, as if Thanchai's stunning performance had been merely expected. Unremarkable. It ignited something dangerous in the young fighter. "I see we have some celebrities in the house tonight," Thanchai said, his voice dropping to a mock, reverential tone as he approached the ropes nearest Chuck. "People who made their names before most of you were born." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The announcer, Nock, stepped forward as if to reclaim her microphone. But Thanchai waved her off with a sharp gesture. "I see Chuck Norris sitting there," he continued, pointing directly at Chuck. The legend himself. The man who fought Bruce Lee. What? 50 years ago? He chuckled, inviting the crowd to join in his mockery. Some laughed nervously, unsure if this was crossing a line. Others looked on in growing discomfort. Chuck's expression remained unchanged. "Tell me, Mr. Norris." Thanchai pressed, emboldened by the lack of reaction. "How does it feel to watch real fighters these days? Must be like seeing a whole different sport from what you did in your black and white movies, right?" A sharp intake of breath swept through the arena. Even those who had been cheering Thanchai moments before seemed shocked at the direct disrespect toward a martial arts icon. Nock's face drained of color as she realized what was happening. This wasn't part of any script, any planned entertainment. This was a young champion drunk on victory and attention, crossing boundaries no Thai fighter would traditionally dare. "You know," Thanchai continued, warming to his theme, "I grew up hearing all these Chuck Norris jokes. Chuck Norris doesn't do push-ups. He pushes the earth down." He mimicked the motion mockingly. "Chuck Norris counted to infinity twice. Chuck Norris can kill 2 stones with 1 bird." Some nervous laughter rippled through the crowd, but it felt hollow, uncomfortable. People exchanged glances, sensing the wrongness of the moment. "But look at him now," Thanchai said, his voice hardening. "Just another old man. What are you now, 75? 80? Do you even remember how to make a fist anymore, old-timer?" In the profound silence that followed, you could almost hear the collective heartbeat of the arena. Everyone's attention pivoted between the brash young fighter and the seated legend. Chuck still didn't move. His breathing remained measured, his gaze steady. If the insults penetrated, he gave no sign. "I bet you couldn't last 30 seconds in this ring today," Thanchai pressed, irritated by Chuck's composure. "Not with a real fighter. Not with someone who doesn't pull punches for the camera." From the medical area emerged a white-coated doctor who approached Noak and whispered something in her ear. She nodded grimly before stepping forward, attempting to reclaim control of the situation. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, trying to gesture for another microphone since Thanchai still held hers. "We have word that Somsak, the bull, Chanarong, is stable and conscious. He will be transported to hospital for precautionary." "Nobody cares about yesterday's fighters," Thanchai interrupted, drawing gasps from the traditionalists in the crowd. "They fall, they break, they're forgotten. That's the way of the world." A boo rippled through sections of the arena, the first negative response Thanchai had received all night. It seemed to surprise him momentarily before he doubled down, pointing again at Chuck. "You want to see something worth remembering? How about this? I'm calling out Chuck Norris right here, right now." Thanchai's voice rose to a shout as he played to the cameras. "Come on, Chuck. 1 round. Show us if those movie moves work in a real fight. Or are you too busy coloring your beard these days?" The crowd's mood shifted palpably. Some younger fans whooped and cheered at the audacity, while others sat in uncomfortable silence. A few began to chant Chuck's name, not as encouragement to fight, but as a show of respect against the onslaught of disrespect. "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" The chant grew, spreading like fire through dry grass. Soon half the arena had taken it up, the sound swelling into a thunder that seemed to shake the building's foundations. Thanchai's smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. "Listen to that. They want to see it too. Come on, old man. 1 round with lightning. Let's see what happens when legend meets reality." Still, Chuck did not respond. His eyes never left Thanchai, but neither did they reveal anger or offense. They simply watched, assessed, measured. Officials conferred urgently at ringside, clearly uncertain how to handle the unprecedented situation. The event producer gestured frantically from the technical area, drawing a finger across his throat in the universal sign to cut the microphone, but Thanchai held it away from anyone trying to approach. "What's wrong, Chuck?" he taunted, voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that nonetheless carried through the arena. "Afraid I'll hurt you? Afraid I'll show everyone that Chuck Norris is just a myth? Just an old man with a dye job and some YouTube clips?" The chanting grew louder, more insistent. "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" In the front row, a Thai official leaned toward Chuck, speaking quietly. Chuck gave the slightest shake of his head, eyes never leaving Thanchai. The young fighter saw this exchange and misinterpreted it, his face lighting up with triumph. "Look at that! He's refusing! The legend is scared!" He played to the cameras again, making a mock-frightened face. "Can't say I blame you. At your age, wouldn't want you breaking a hip. Better stick to infomercials for exercise equipment, right?" The chanting faltered slightly, as uncertainty rippled through the crowd. Would Chuck simply allow this disrespect to continue unanswered? Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. In this moment of hesitation, Thanchai made his final, fatal mistake. "This is what happens when fossils don't stay buried," he declared, making a dismissive gesture toward Chuck. "Your time is over, old man. This is our time now. We're faster, stronger, better than you ever were." He turned his back on Chuck then. A deliberate, final insult in martial arts culture, showing an opponent they weren't worth watching, weren't worth respecting as a threat. And then, in the suddenly hushed arena, Chuck Norris stood up. The motion was smooth, unhurried, yet it captured every eye. There was no flourish, no obvious display of intent. He simply rose to his feet with the fluid ease of a man decades younger. The crowd's reaction was instantaneous gasps, followed by a wave of phone cameras lifting higher, followed by absolute, breathless silence. Thanchai, sensing the shift, turned slowly back toward the VIP section. His cocky grin froze, then faltered, as he saw Chuck standing, calmly removing his watch and placing it in his pocket. "Oh," Thanchai said, a nervous laugh escaping him. "Now we're getting somewhere. Coming up to shake my hand, old-timer? Congratulate me properly?" But Chuck wasn't moving toward the ring. Not yet. With methodical precision, he removed his black button-down shirt, folding it neatly and handing it to a wide-eyed attendant. Underneath, he wore a simple black t-shirt that revealed arms corded with lean muscle, not the showy bulk of youth, but the seasoned sinew of a man who had never stopped training, never stopped honoring his art. Thanchai's expression flickered between amusement and the first glimmer of uncertainty. This wasn't the reaction he had expected. There was no anger, no shouted response, no flustered dignity, just quiet, focused preparation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Knox suddenly announced, having obtained another microphone, "please remain calm. We are experiencing an unexpected development." Even her professional voice trembled slightly. Chuck began to walk toward the ring, his pace unhurried, his breathing unchanged. The crowd parted before him like water, fans pulling back almost reverently to clear his path. No one spoke. No one dared break the spell of the moment with mere words. With each step Chuck took, Thanchai's bravado visibly diminished. He backed up slightly in the ring, glancing around as if suddenly remembering he was surrounded by thousands of witnesses. "Hey, I was just having some fun," he said, his voice lacking its previous certainty. "Just hyping the crowd, you know. No disrespect intended." Chuck continued his approach, his face betraying nothing, neither anger nor anticipation. He moved like a man who had made peace with violence decades ago, who understood its place and purpose, who had no need to rush toward or away from it. When he reached the steps leading up to the ring, officials moved forward uncertainly, caught between protocol and the undeniable gravity of the moment. Chuck paused, looking at the nearest official, a silent question. The man hesitated, then stepped aside with a respectful, wide gesture. As Chuck climbed the steps, the arena erupted in renewed chanting. Chuck! 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 The sound was deafening now, a physical force that seemed to press against the walls and ceiling. Yet within that circle of canvas, time seemed to slow, reality narrowing to just two men, one who had sought glory through arrogance, and one who had found it through discipline. Thonchai backed up another step, the microphone hanging forgotten at his side. For the first time, the crowd saw something new in his expression. Fear. Chuck Norris stood at the edge of the ring, one hand resting lightly on the top rope. The arena's lights caught the silver in his beard. The lines of experience etched into his face, not as marks of weakness, but as a record of a life fully lived. He didn't immediately enter, instead regarding the boundary before him with what appeared to be thoughtful consideration. This moment of hesitation gave Thonchai an opportunity to recover some of his bravado. He'd never backed down from a challenge it wasn't in his nature. That momentary flicker of uncertainty transformed back into his trademark cocky grin, though it didn't quite reach his eyes now. Well, well, he said, finding his voice again. The legend actually wants to step in the ring. He bounced lightly on his toes, rolling his shoulders, the performative motions of a fighter loosening up. You sure about this, old man? I don't think your Medicare covers what's about to happen. A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd, but they were quickly silenced by the majority's disapproving murmurs. The atmosphere had shifted. Thonchai no longer commanded the room's energy. All focus, all respect, had transferred to the quiet figure at the ring's edge. Officials conferred urgently at ringside. This wasn't on the program, wasn't sanctioned, wasn't covered by insurance. The event producer made frantic slashing motions across his throat, signaling to security to intervene. But when two burly security guards approached Chuck from behind, intending to gently steer him back to his seat, something remarkable happened. They stopped several feet away, suddenly unwilling or unable to touch him. It wasn't that Chuck had moved or spoken. There was simply an aura of absolute certainty around him that made interference feel inappropriate. One guard even took a step back, then offered a slight bow of respect before retreating. Chuck's focus never wavered from Thonchai. The ring announcer, Noak, approached the ring apron, her professional demeanor strained but holding. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a scheduled exhibition. We must ask Mr. Norris to return to his seat and... Let him come, Thonchai interrupted, waving her off. The people want to see it. I want to see it. He directed his next words at Chuck, leaning over the ropes. Don't worry. I'll go easy on you. Wouldn't want to hurt a senior citizen. Chuck remained silent, his breathing steady, his eyes never leaving Thonchai's. There was no anger in his gaze, no wounded pride seeking restoration. If anything, there was something like compassion. The look of a teacher who sees a student in need of correction. The head official climbed into the ring, approaching Thonchai to speak in urgent, hushed tones. Thonchai shook his head repeatedly, gesturing dismissively. Their discussion grew heated, the official pointing toward Chuck with obvious concern. He's an old man, the official could be heard saying. This isn't proper. This isn't how we show respect to legends. Thonchai laughed. He wants this. Look at him. The man's literally asking for it. He raised his voice, directing it at Chuck again. Aren't you, old-timer? You want to see if the legends are true? If Chuck Norris really can deliver a roundhouse kick faster than lightning? Throughout this exchange, Chuck remained perfectly still, a counterpoint to Thanchai's restless movement. When he finally moved, it wasn't to respond to the taunts, but to duck smoothly between the ropes and enter the ring with the easy grace of a man who had done so thousands of times. The crowd erupted again, phones and cameras flashing in a storm of light. Security personnel lined the ring now, uncertain whether to intervene or simply bear witness to whatever was about to unfold. "All right, people," Thanchai called out, feeding off the energy, circling Chuck like a predator. "You're about to witness history. The day lightning struck down a legend." Chuck stood center ring, hands relaxed at his sides, watching Thanchai's movement with calm assessment. His posture was neither aggressive nor defensive, simply present, grounded in the moment. The contrast between the two couldn't have been more stark. Thanchai bounced, preened, played to the crowd with exaggerated gestures. Chuck remained still, conserving energy, giving nothing away. One sought the crowd's validation. The other had no need for it. Nock had retreated ringside, conferring urgently with production staff. The scheduled program was derailing before her eyes, and there seemed to be no stopping what was unfolding. She reached for her microphone with professional resignation. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, voice steadier now. "It appears we are witnessing an unscheduled exhibition. Please remain in your seats and—" She hesitated, searching for appropriate words, "and show respect for what you are about to see." Thanchai continued circling, his initial swagger gradually transforming into a fighter's calculated assessment. For all his bravado, he was no fool in combat. He had risen to the top because beneath the showmanship lay genuine skill and tactical intelligence. "No referee, no rules," he called out to Chuck, lowering his voice so only those closest could hear. "You sure you want to do this, grandfather? Not too late to walk away with your dignity." Chuck finally spoke, his voice surprisingly soft yet carrying clearly through the hushed arena. "You've mistaken attention for respect." 5 words. Delivered without heat, without judgment, a simple observation, offered, as one might comment, on the weather. Yet they landed with more impact than any physical blow, cutting through Thanchai's performance to the insecurity beneath. Thanchai's eyes narrowed, his smile hardening into something uglier. Respect is earned in the ring. Not in movies. Not in stories. Not in jokes on the internet. Chuck nodded slightly, acknowledging the point without agreeing with it. "Then let your skills speak," he said, echoing Somsak's earlier words to Thanchai before their fight. Something flickered across Thanchai's face, recognition, perhaps, or a moment of shame quickly suppressed. He rolled his shoulders again, centering himself. "Fine," he said, voice dropping to a dangerous register. "Skills it is." He exploded forward without warning, launching a blindingly fast combination that had overwhelmed every previous opponent: jab, cross, high kick. Each technique executed with perfect form and devastating power. Chuck didn't retreat. He didn't cover up defensively. He simply wasn't where the strikes landed. With minimal movement, he slipped the punches by mere millimeters and deflected the kick with a subtle shift of his forearm. Thanchai blinked in surprise but pressed forward with another combination, this one lower, targeting the body and legs. Again, Chuck's defense was economical. Precise, the movements of a man who had spent decades refining unnecessary motion out of his art. The crowd watched in hushed amazement. They had expected to see an old legend humbled by youth and speed. Instead, they were witnessing a masterclass in efficiency, the difference between someone who fights to be seen and someone who fights because it is what they are. Frustration flickered across Thanchai's face. He launched a spinning back kick, his signature move, with enough force to break ribs. Chuck sidestepped it with such precise timing that Thanchai's momentum carried him off balance. In that split-second window of vulnerability, Chuck could have countered devastatingly. Instead, he simply stepped back, giving Thanchai space to recover. This wasn't about punishment, it was about education. Thanchai regained his footing, anger now visible beneath his composure. "Stop dancing and fight me," he growled, launching another furious combination. Chuck parried the strikes with subtle redirections, letting Thanchai wear himself out against defense that bent but never broke. It was like watching water flow around stone, Thanchai's energy dissipating against Chuck's immovable calm. After a particularly aggressive flurry that hit nothing but air, Thanchai stepped back, breathing harder now, reassessing. His confident smile had vanished, replaced by focused intensity. For the first time, he was fighting without showmanship, without playing to the crowd. "Why won't you attack?" he demanded, circling more cautiously now. "Afraid you'll miss? Afraid you'll show everyone how slow you've gotten?" Chuck's expression remained unchanged. "I have nothing to prove," he said simply. "Do you?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning beyond the ring. Beyond this moment. Thanchai's jaw tightened, something vulnerable flashing briefly in his eyes before being buried beneath renewed determination. "I'll show you what proving yourself looks like," he said, setting his stance for another attack. But before he could launch forward, Chuck did something unexpected. He lowered his hands slightly and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, an invitation. "Then come," he said quietly. "Show me who you really are." For a heartbeat, uncertainty crossed Thanchai's face, but he was too committed to his path to change course now, too wrapped in his own mythology to consider another way. With a sharp ki that cut through the arena's silence, he charged forward, summoning every ounce of his formidable skill for one definitive assault. What happened next would be replayed on social media millions of times in the coming days, analyzed frame by frame, discussed by martial arts experts worldwide. Yet no technical breakdown could fully capture what the live audience witnessed the moment when legend became reality before their eyes. Thanchai's attack was perfect. A lightning-fast combination that had earned him his nickname and his undefeated record. Any other opponent would have fallen before this storm of precision strikes. But Chuck Norris wasn't any other opponent. As Thanchai's right hand extended toward Chuck's face with fight-ending force, the older fighter executed a technique so clean, so perfectly timed, it seemed to unfold in slow motion for those watching. A subtle shift of weight, a precise parry that redirected Thanchai's punching arm just past Chuck's ear, and then the counter-strike. Chuck's roundhouse kick unfolded like poetry, economical, beautiful, devastating in its simplicity. There was no wasted energy. No telegraphing, no theatrical wind-up. One moment his foot was on the ground. The next, it connected precisely with Thanchai's temple, with a sound that echoed through the suddenly silent arena. Thanchai froze mid-motion, eyes widening in shock. For a suspended moment, he remained upright, as if his body hadn't yet registered what had happened. Then his knees buckled, and he collapsed to the canvas like a marionette whose strings had been cut. Chuck immediately stepped back, making no move to follow up. There was no celebration, no raised arms in victory, no playing to the crowd. He simply returned to his centered stance, watching carefully as Thanchai lay motionless on the canvas. For 3 heartbeats, the arena held its collective breath. Then, like a dam breaking, sound erupted, gasps, shouts, and then applause building into a thunderous roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Medical staff rushed into the ring, surrounding Thonchai's prone form. Chuck stepped further back, giving them space to work, his face showing its first real emotion of the night, concern for his fallen opponent. The crowd was on its feet now, phones raised high to capture the aftermath of what had just occurred. The chant began again, building from scattered voices into a unified roar that filled every corner of the arena. Chuck! 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 But Chuck wasn't listening to the adulation. His eyes were fixed on Thonchai, watching intently, until he saw the young fighter's eyes flutter open, saw him respond to the medic's questions. Only then did the tension in Chuck's shoulders ease slightly. Nock's voice cut through the chaos. Though she was clearly struggling to maintain professional detachment, "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. Medical personnel are attending to our champion, and we ask for your respect and patience during this moment." Chuck turned toward the ropes, preparing to exit as quietly as he had entered. But before he could leave, Thonchai's voice, weaker but still carrying his characteristic defiance, reached him. "Wait." Chuck paused, turning back to see Thonchai pushing away the medic's hands, struggling to sit up despite their protests. Their eyes met across the ring, the young champions filled with confusion and something deeper, more vulnerable. The master's steady, patient, waiting. In that suspended moment between them, something passed unspoken but profound. A recognition. A possibility. A beginning rather than an end. The crowd fell silent again, sensing the weight of what was unfolding before them. This was no longer about spectacle or entertainment. They were witnessing something raw and real, a moment of truth between two warriors that transcended the physical exchange that had preceded it. Thonchai swallowed hard, his usual bravado stripped away, leaving only the young man beneath the persona. When he spoke again, his voice carried through the hushed arena with painful clarity. "Teach me." The two words hung in the air like smoke, changing everything. Teach me. Not a demand, but a request. Perhaps the first genuine one Thonchai had made in years. The medical staff froze around him, unsure whether to continue their examination or give space to this unexpected moment. Chuck Norris stood perfectly still, regarding the fallen fighter with careful assessment. The crowd held its collective breath, sensing that something profound was unfolding before them, something beyond the physical contest they'd witnessed seconds earlier. Thonchai's face, normally animated with cocky certainty, now showed raw vulnerability. The blow that had dropped him had done more than stun his body. It had cracked the persona he'd constructed, revealing the searching young man beneath the showman's mask. "Please," he added, the word catching slightly in his throat, unfamiliar and difficult. Chuck moved then, crossing the distance between them with measured steps. The crowd remained hushed, the only sounds the soft padding of his feet on canvas and the distant click of camera shutters. He stopped before Thonchai, looking down at the young fighter who was still supported by the medical staff. For a long moment, Chuck said nothing. His face revealed neither triumph nor judgment, only thoughtful consideration. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, meant primarily for Thonchai rather than the watching thousands. "Learning begins with humility," he said. "Not with words, but with actions." Thonchai swallowed hard, a flash of his old defiance crossing his features before subsiding into something more genuine. He began, then stopped, uncertain how to continue. The performance was gone, leaving only the man. Chuck extended his hand not to help Thonchai up, but as a gesture between equals. A beginning. Thonchai stared at the offered hand as if it were something foreign, something he'd forgotten how to recognize. After a heartbeat's hesitation, he reached up and grasped it firmly. The touch seemed to ground him, to pull him back from the edge of whatever precipice he'd been balancing on. "The first lesson," Chuck said quietly, is already over." He released Thanchai's hand and turned, walking toward the ropes with the same unhurried pace that had marked his entrance. The crowd remained eerily silent, sensing that applause or cheers would somehow cheapen what they were witnessing. As Chuck ducked between the ropes, Nock seemed to recover her professional composure. She stepped forward, microphone in hand, clearly intending to frame this unprecedented moment for the audience. But before she could speak, Chuck raised a hand, a gentle request rather than a command, and she fell silent again, understanding instinctively that words would only diminish what had happened. Chuck descended the steps, his movements fluid and controlled despite his age. At ringside, officials and security personnel stepped back, creating a path for him. No one tried to stop him. No one attempted to guide him. There was a collective recognition that this man needed no direction. Behind him in the ring, Thanchai had pushed himself to his feet, waving off the continued concern of the medical staff. His eyes never left Chuck's retreating figure. His expression a complex mix of emotions, confusion, respect, and something like awakening. "Wait," he called out, his voice still unsteady. "What happens now?" Chuck paused at the edge of the arena floor, but didn't turn around. "Now," he said, voice carrying just enough for Thanchai and those nearest to hear, "you decide who you want to be." With that, he continued walking, moving through the crowd that parted before him like water around stone. No one reached out for selfies or autographs. No one called his name or demanded attention. There was instead a reverent silence, an unspoken understanding that they were in the presence of something rare and valuable. In the ring, Thanchai stood frozen, the significance of Chuck's words washing over him. For perhaps the first time since he'd begun his fighting career, he was confronted with a question he couldn't answer with his fists or his bravado. Who did he want to be? The spell was broken by Nock, who finally found her voice. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "we have just witnessed something extraordinary." She seemed to search for more adequate words and, finding none, simply continued, "We will take a brief intermission before our next scheduled bout. Please remain in your seats." As the house lights came up slightly, the crowd began to stir. A rising buzz of conversation filling the arena as people turned to their neighbors, trying to process what they had seen. Social media notifications chimed throughout the space as clips of the brief but profound encounter spread across the internet at lightning speed. Chuck continued his solitary journey through the arena, moving with quiet purpose toward the exit. Arena staff cleared his path with subtle gestures, keeping well-meaning fans at bay. Yet despite the thousands of eyes upon him, Chuck seemed utterly alone in his thoughts, centered in a calm that nothing could disturb. Near the tunnel that led from the arena floor, a young boy of perhaps 10 years old slipped past the security line, approaching Chuck with wide-eyed wonder. A security guard moved to intercept him, but Chuck raised a hand, stopping the man with a small gesture. Chuck knelt down to the boy's level, his movements betraying none of the stiffness one might expect from a man his age. The boy spoke rapid Thai, his voice too soft to carry, his hands moving in excited gestures. Chuck listened with patience, his weathered face softening into something approaching a smile. When the boy finished, Chuck replied in simple Thai words that made the child's face light up with wonder. Chuck placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder, saying something else that made him stand straighter, his chest puffing with pride. Then Chuck rose and continued toward the exit, leaving the beaming child to be collected by his awestruck father. As Chuck reached the mouth of the exit tunnel, he paused and turned, taking in the arena one last time. His gaze traveled up to the ring, where Thanchai still stood, having refused to leave despite the medical staff's insistence. Their eyes met across the distance, the young champion and the aging legend, connected by something deeper than combat or competition. Chuck gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, acknowledgement, challenge, and invitation all at once. Then he turned and disappeared into the shadows of the tunnel. In his wake, he left a transformed space. The electric energy that had filled the arena earlier, the bloodlust, the cruel excitement, the hunger for spectacle, had been replaced by something more contemplative. Conversations were hushed, thoughtful. People reviewed the video they'd captured on their phones with expressions of wonder rather than the usual vicarious thrill. In the production booth high above the arena floor, the event director pressed fingers to his earpiece, listening to urgent updates from network executives. "Are you seeing these numbers?" came the excited voice in his ear. "Social media is exploding. Number Chuck Norris legend is trending worldwide. We need to milk this. Get him back out there for an interview." The director shook his head slowly, watching the empty tunnel where Chuck had disappeared. "He's gone," he said simply. "And I don't think anyone's going to convince him to come back for a soundbite." "Then get the other guy." "What's his name?" "Thanchai. We need reaction, emotion, something for the highlight reel." The director looked toward the ring, where Thanchai had finally consented to follow the medical staff to the examination area. Unlike his usual strutting exit, the young fighter moved with subdued awareness, his face introspective rather than triumphant. "I think," the director said carefully, "we should give him some time." In the examination room, Thanchai sat on the edge of a table, submitting to neurological checks with uncharacteristic patience. The doctor shined a light in his eyes, checking pupil response, while a nurse took his blood pressure. His manager hovered nearby, phone pressed to his ear, face vacillating between concern and calculation. "The sponsors are going crazy," the manager whispered, covering his phone's microphone. "They want to know if you're okay. If you're going to release a statement. If..." "Not now," Thanchai said quietly, his voice lacking its usual edge. The manager blinked in surprise. "What?" "I said not now." Thanchai's tone was firm but not angry. "I need to think." The doctor finished his examination, stepping back with a look of professional satisfaction. No signs of concussion. The kick was perfectly placed, enough force to knock you down, not enough to cause damage. He shook his head in grudging admiration. Remarkable control. Thanchai nodded absently, his mind elsewhere. "Where did he go?" he asked suddenly. The doctor exchanged glances with the nurse. "Mr. Norris? I believe he left the arena. Did anyone go with him? Did anyone talk to him?" The manager stepped forward. "Why do you care? Listen, we need to get ahead of this. I'm thinking we spin it as a publicity stunt. Say it was planned all along to promote your new energy drink deal. We'll say..." "Stop." Thanchai held up a hand, his expression hardening into something new, not the performative intensity he showed for cameras, but genuine resolve. "That's not what happened. I'm not going to lie about it. But your image..." "My image," Thanchai said slowly, testing the words, "needs to change." The manager's mouth opened and closed, no words emerging. This was so far from the script he'd come to expect from his star fighter that he had no ready response. Thanchai stood, rolling his shoulders, testing his balance. He felt physically fine. The kick had been precision itself, enough to drop him, not enough to damage. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. The experience of being so effortlessly handled, of having all his skill and speed rendered meaningless, had cracked something open inside him, a door he hadn't known was closed. "I need to find him," he said suddenly. The doctor frowned. "You should rest. Even without a concussion, your body's been through..." "I'm fine." Thanchai moved toward the door with new purpose. "I need to find him before he's gone." His manager scrambled to follow. "What are you going to do? What are you going to say? We need to coordinate the message here." Thonchai stopped in the doorway, turning to face the older man with a clarity that hadn't been there before. "For once," he said quietly, "I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to listen." He stepped into the hallway, moving with increasing urgency toward the arena's rear exit. Staff members and officials stepped aside, watching him pass with expressions ranging from concern to curiosity. This Thonchai was different. The swagger gone, replaced by focused intent. Outside in the humid Bangkok night, a small crowd of die-hard fans had gathered near the VIP exit, hoping for a glimpse of celebrities leaving the event. Security personnel formed a barrier, keeping them at a respectful distance from the black SUVs waiting to transport the dignitaries. Thonchai pushed through the arena doors, eyes scanning the scene urgently. A ripple of recognition passed through the waiting fans, murmurs, pointing, phones raised to capture his unexpected appearance. For once, he ignored them completely, moving straight to the head of security. "Chuck Norris," he said without preamble. "Where did he go?" The security chief regarded him coolly. "Mr. Norris left 10 minutes ago. Private transportation." "Where to? Which hotel is he staying at?" The man's expression hardened further. "That information is confidential, Mr. Jarwin." Thonchai ran a hand through his sweat-dampened hair, frustration building. "I need to talk to him. It's important. Perhaps you should have considered that before disrespecting him in front of thousands," the security chief replied, his professional veneer cracking slightly to reveal personal disapproval. The words landed like a physical blow. Thonchai took a step back, the truth of them sinking in. He had built his career on disrespect, on treating opponents as stepping stones rather than fellow travelers on the same path. And now, when he finally encountered someone whose wisdom he desperately needed, that same disrespect had closed the door. His shoulders sagged slightly, the realization weighing on him physically. "You're right," he admitted quietly. The security chief's expression softened marginally at this unexpected humility. He glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard, then leaned closer. "The old temple in Lumpini Park," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "He asked the driver to take him there. Said he wanted to see it in the moonlight before his flight tomorrow." Thonchai's eyes widened. "Thank you," he breathed. Genuine gratitude in his voice. Perhaps for the first time since he'd become champion. The security chief straightened, professional mask back in place. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Jarwin. Please step back from the security perimeter." Thonchai nodded, understanding the man's position. He turned away, ignoring the calls of fans and the flashing cameras, moving with purpose toward the line of taxis waiting beyond the arena's perimeter. Behind him, his manager emerged from the building, phone still clutched to his ear, face contorted with frustration. "Thonchai," he called. "Where are you going? We have the post-fight press conference. The sponsors are waiting." But Thonchai didn't turn back. For the first time in his meteoric career, something mattered more than sponsors, more than cameras, more than the carefully constructed image he'd built. Something real was waiting for him if he had the courage to pursue it. As he slid into the back seat of a taxi, giving directions to Lumpini Park, he caught his reflection in the window glass. The face that looked back at him was familiar yet strange, still his features, but somehow stripped of the performative armor he'd worn for so long. "Who do you want to be?" Chuck had asked him. As the taxi pulled away from the arena, merging into the neon-lit chaos of Bangkok's night traffic, Thonchai realized he was finally ready to seek an answer. The taxi wound through Bangkok's congested streets, neon reflecting off its windows in electric streaks. Inside, Thonchai sat uncharacteristically still, replaying the arena's events with painful clarity. Each choice that led to his humiliation now seemed obvious, a path of arrogance with only one possible end. Lumpini Park, the driver announced, pulling to the curb. Thonchai paid and stepped out, enveloped by the park's relative quiet. Despite the late hour, couples strolled hand in hand. Elderly practitioners moved through Tai Chi forms beneath street lamps. Tourists wandered with guidebooks, illuminated by phones. But which temple had the security chief meant? Lumpini contained several sacred spaces. Thonchai oriented himself and headed toward the park's interior with purposeful strides. A strange sensation settled over him: vulnerability. Without his entourage, without cameras tracking every move, without his performative shell, he felt exposed. Just a young man walking alone, carrying the weight of his choices. He passed a small artificial lake mirroring city lights. Ahead, a traditional Thai pavilion emerged from a stand of trees, its peaked roof illuminated by subtle ground lighting. Even from a distance, Thonchai could see a solitary figure seated on its steps, silhouetted against the soft glow. His pace slowed, uncertainty growing with each step. What would he say? The confidence that had propelled him from the arena faltered as reality set in. Chuck Norris sat perfectly still, eyes closed, hands resting lightly on his knees. He appeared to be meditating, his breathing measured, his posture exemplifying the balance Thonchai had always simulated, but never truly understood. Thonchai stopped several meters away, reluctant to disturb the older man's peace. For a moment, he simply observed, taking in the quiet dignity that seemed to emanate from Chuck like an invisible force. Without opening his eyes, Chuck spoke. "You found me." No surprise in his voice, just simple acknowledgement. Thonchai shifted uncomfortably. "The security guard told me where you'd gone." "And why did you follow?" The question hung in the humid night air. Deceptively simple, yet impossibly complex. Thonchai opened his mouth to deliver one of his practiced responses, something clever, something calculated, but found the words stuck in his throat. "I don't know," he admitted, the truth surprising even himself. Chuck opened his eyes, regarding the young fighter with gentle assessment. "That," he said quietly, "is a better beginning than certainty." He gestured to the empty space beside him. "Sit." Thonchai hesitated, then moved forward, lowering himself a respectful distance from Chuck. For a long moment, neither spoke. Night sounds surrounded them, distant traffic, music from street vendors, the gentle splash of a fountain. "I'm sorry," Thonchai blurted suddenly, "for what I said in the ring. I didn't." Chuck raised a hand, stopping him. "Words matter," he said. "But they're cheap. Everyone offers words when they're caught. What matters is what came before. And what comes after." Thonchai nodded slowly. "I've never been knocked out before," he said, changing direction. "Not in competition, not in training. Never." A ghost of a smile touched Chuck's lips. "There's always someone better. Even for you?" "Especially for me." Chuck turned toward the Buddha statue, visible through the temple's open doors. "The moment you believe you've reached the summit is the moment you begin to fall." Thonchai followed his gaze. "Considering this, all my life," he said slowly, "fighting has been about proving something, about being seen, about showing everyone who doubted me that I was better." Chuck nodded, waiting. "But you?" Thonchai struggled to articulate the revelation building since their encounter. "You don't need to prove anything. You don't care if people see what you can do." "Why?" "Because the opinion that matters most is the one you have of yourself," Chuck said simply. And you can't lie to yourself about whether you've done the work, whether you've honored your art, whether you've respected your opponents. The words struck Thanchai like physical blows, exposing the hollow center of everything he'd built. "I haven't," he admitted, voice barely audible. "Not for a long time." Chuck turned to look at him directly, his gaze neither accusing nor forgiving, simply present, witnessing. "Why do you fight?" he asked. Thanchai considered the question honestly, perhaps for the first time. "I was poor," he began hesitantly. "My family had nothing. My father left when I was 4. My mother cleaned hotel rooms, worked 2 jobs. We lived in one room in Klong Toi slum." He paused, memories flooding back. Neighborhood boys would fight for money, small bets. Tourists watching sometimes. "I was fast. Had good instincts. Started winning, bringing home money." Chuck listened without interruption, his attention complete. "A trainer saw me when I was 12, said I had natural talent, took me to his gym, taught me proper Muay Thai." Thanchai's voice softened. "My mother cried when I told her. Said now I wouldn't end up dead in an alley like my father." He looked at his hands, the carefully wrapped knuckles, calluses built over years. "At first, I fought to help my family, to give my mother a better life. But then came the attention, sponsors, fame." He trailed off, the trajectory of his corruption suddenly clear. "I started to love that more than the art itself." "Fame is like sugar," Chuck said after a moment. "Sweet on the tongue, but it can't nourish you. It can't sustain you when the lights go down and you're alone with yourself." Thanchai nodded, feeling the truth of this in his bones. "How do you find your way back? When you've lost the path?" Chuck turned to the Buddha statue again. "You begin again," he said simply. "You return to fundamentals. You practice not for others' eyes, but for the practice itself. You find humility before your art. And if it's too late, if you've gone too far down the wrong path, it's never too late to change direction," Chuck said with certainty. "The past shapes us, but it doesn't have to define us." Thanchai felt something shift within him. Not a dramatic transformation, but the quiet beginning of one. A seed planted that might, with care, grow into something worthwhile. "That kick," he said suddenly. "The one you dropped me with. I never saw it coming." A smile touched Chuck's lips. "Because you were looking at my face, trying to read emotions, waiting for telegraphed intentions. But true technique doesn't start with the limb that strikes. It begins in the center, in the core, in the spirit." Thanchai considered this. "Could you show me?" Chuck studied him for a long moment, weighing his sincerity. Then he nodded once, and rose with fluid grace. "Stand." And in the quiet sanctuary of Lumpini Park, beneath ancient trees and stars partially hidden by Bangkok's glow, a master began to teach, and a champion began to learn. 6 weeks later, Rajadamnern Stadium hummed with anticipation once more. The same crowd, the same electric atmosphere, the same expectation of spectacle. But something fundamental had changed. Nok Van Priya adjusted her headset, scanning the packed arena while reviewing her notes before the main event. Her producer's voice crackled in her earpiece. "Are you sure about these changes to the intro?" he asked, skepticism evident. "The promoters want us to play up the bad boy angle. That's what sells tickets. The sponsors are expecting the Lightning brand they've paid for." "Trust me," Nok replied, a quiet certainty in her voice. "Something's different. I saw his final training session yesterday. This isn't the same fighter who left this arena 6 weeks ago." Her producer sighed audibly. "Your call. But if ratings drop, it's on you." We're live in 3 minutes. Noak nodded to herself, straightening her jacket. In 15 years of announcing Muay Thai events, she had developed an intuition for the sport's rhythms and narratives. What she had witnessed in Thanchai's training room yesterday wasn't a marketing strategy or a temporary shift, it was transformation at the fundamental level. The arena lights dimmed precisely on schedule, focusing attention on the ring at center stage. The crowd's roar dimmed to an expectant murmur. Noak took a deep breath and began her introduction, her voice carrying through the packed stadium with professional clarity. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Raja Damnern Stadium for tonight's Muay Thai championship bout. She paused, letting the energy build. 6 weeks ago, in this very arena, we witnessed a moment that has since become legend, a clash between generations, between philosophies, between approaches to martial arts. On the giant screens suspended above the ring, footage played of the now famous encounter between Thanchai and Chuck Norris. The crowd murmured, many holding up phones to record, immortalizing their presence at an event that had entered martial arts folklore. That night, Noak continued, we saw something rare in our modern world. A moment of pure truth. A moment when the essence of martial arts transcended spectacle and showmanship. In the VIP section, sponsors shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the high-energy, confrontational intro they had expected. Several executives leaned together, whispering urgently, glancing at their phones where engagement metrics would soon reveal the audience's reaction. Tonight, Noak pressed on, undeterred. The undisputed champion returns to defend his title against the #1 contender. But first, a moment of respect for a true legend of our sport. The screens shifted to show Somsak, the Bull Chanarong, standing at ringside, fully recovered from the knockout he'd suffered 6 weeks earlier. The crowd erupted in applause, many standing to show their appreciation for the veteran fighter. Somsak acknowledged the reception with a humble Y gesture, bowing slightly. His eyes, however, were fixed not on the crowd, but on the tunnel from which the fighters would soon emerge. And now? Noak announced, her voice rising with the energy of the moment. Please, welcome the challenger from Myanmar, with 33 wins and only 2 defeats, the Tiger of Yangon Min Litet Ong. The challenger emerged to a solid reception, moving with the fluid confidence of a fighter in his prime. Unlike many who had fought Thanchai before, Min Het-tet carried no obvious chip on his shoulder, no manufactured rivalry. He performed his traditional entrance ritual with discipline and focus, honoring the 4 corners of the ring before taking his place. As Min Het-tet completed his ritual and settled in his corner, an expectant hush fell over the arena. This was the moment when Thanchai typically made his flashy entrance, complete with pounding music, elaborate lighting effects, and provocative gestures designed to maximize both adulation and hatred from different segments of the crowd. And now, Noak said, her voice softening slightly, your defending champion. From Bangkok, Thailand, with a perfect record of 26 wins, no defeats. The fighter, known as Lightning. The music that began was not Thanchai's usual entrance track with its aggressive beat and boastful lyrics. Instead, traditional Thai music flowed through the arena, the ancient sounds of pipes and drums that had accompanied warriors for centuries. The crowd's murmurs grew confused, then fell silent as Thanchai appeared at the top of the entrance ramp. Gone was the glittering robe with its lightning bolt embellishments. Gone were the entourage of beautiful women, the security detail, the elaborate choreography designed to center him as a celebrity rather than a martial artist. Instead, Thanchai walked alone, wearing a simple white Mongkon headband and the traditional Prajude armbands that had adorned Thai fighters since before the sport had become a global phenomenon. His expression was neither his trademark cocky grin nor an artificially serious game face, but something more genuine, focused, present, clear-eyed. In the front row, a sponsor executive hissed into his phone, "What the hell is this? Where's the brand we paid for?" But his voice was lost in the growing murmur of the crowd, a sound not of disappointment, but of collective realization that they were witnessing something unexpected and authentic. Thangchai moved down the ramp at a measured pace, his gaze direct, his energy contained rather than expansive. When he reached the ring, he performed the traditional Muay crew ritual with slow, deliberate precision, honoring his teachers, his heritage, and the art itself with each movement. The crowd watched in stunned silence, witnessing what seemed like an entirely different fighter from the one they had come to expect. In the VIP section, Somsak leaned forward, eyes narrowed in assessment, a slight smile touching his lips. When Thangchai completed his ritual, he approached the center of the ring where the referee and his opponent waited. He offered Min Hai-tet a respectful "why," which the surprised challenger returned after a moment's hesitation. The referee gave his instructions, which both fighters acknowledged with nods rather than the typical stare-down theatrics. As they turned to return to their corners, Min Hai-tet spoke quietly to Thangchai. "I expected more talk," he said, a hint of confusion in his voice. Thangchai met his gaze steadily. "Tonight is about the art," he replied simply. "Nothing more." The bell rang, and the fight began. What unfolded over the next 5 rounds wasn't just a championship bout, it was a revelation. Thangchai fought with a purity of technique that had been previously obscured by his showmanship. His strikes were clean, precise, devastating in their efficiency rather than their brutality. There was poetry in his movement, a flow that spoke of countless hours honing each transition, each combination. When he gained advantage, he didn't play to the crowd or mock his opponent. He simply reset, continuing the relentless pressure of technical excellence. His eyes remained focused, present, never darting to the cameras or scanning the crowd for validation. Min Hai-tet, a superb fighter in his own right, matched Thangchai's skill for much of the contest. The two warriors pushed each other to extraordinary heights, neither seeking to humiliate the other, both honoring the exchange with their full commitment. By the 4th round, the crowd's energy had transformed completely. The bloodlust that had characterized previous Thangchai fights, the cruel anticipation of humiliation, the vicarious thrill of dominance had given way to something rarer and more valuable: appreciation. Phones were lowered as spectators found themselves fully present, unwilling to miss a moment of the display before them, too engaged to worry about capturing it for social media. In the final round, Thangchai created an opening with a perfectly timed feint, following it with a devastating elbow strike that dropped Min Hai-tet to the canvas. The referee immediately stepped in, counting as the challenger struggled to regain his feet. The old Thangchai would have paraded around the ring, arms raised, playing to the adulation of the crowd, perhaps even mocking his fallen opponent. This Thangchai did something different. He stepped back to his corner, giving his opponent space, showing respect for the brave effort Min Hai-tet had given. When the count reached 8 and it became clear the challenger could not continue, the referee waved off the fight, indicating Thangchai as the winner. The crowd erupted, their reaction more complex than simple celebration. There was appreciation, respect, perhaps even a touch of awe at the transformation they had witnessed. Thangchai approached his fallen opponent, extending a hand to help Min Hai-tet to his feet. The two fighters embraced briefly, a gesture of mutual respect that would have been unthinkable from the Thangchai of 6 weeks ago. Nok entered the ring, microphone in hand, approaching the champion for the customary post-fight interview. "Lightning," she began, using his fighting name. "A stunning performance and a successful title defense. But I have to ask, We've seen a different fighter tonight. What changed since your last appearance in this ring? Thanchai took the microphone, his expression thoughtful. For a moment, he seemed to be considering what version of himself to present to the world watching through countless cameras and screens. I remembered something I had forgotten, he said finally, his voice clear and direct. Muay Thai isn't just a sport or a way to fame. It's an art that deserves respect. A path that demands humility. He paused, looking out over the crowd. 6 weeks ago, I was taught a lesson by a true master. Not just about fighting, but about being worthy of the gifts we're given. Nock's professional composure slipped slightly, genuine emotion showing through. Are you referring to your encounter with Chuck Norris? Thanchai nodded. He showed me there's more to strength than what can be seen. More to mastery than what can be advertised. A small, genuine smile touched his lips, and he reminded me that the path never ends. We're all students until our final day. He handed the microphone back to Nock, bowed to the four corners of the ring in the traditional sign of respect, and then exited, much as he had entered, without fanfare, without performance. Simply a warrior who had completed his task with honor. As he disappeared into the tunnel, the arena buzzed with conversation. Fans turned to each other, debating the change they had witnessed, some filming reaction videos, others simply sitting in thoughtful silence. In the locker room, Thanchai's manager paced nervously, phone pressed to his ear. I know, he said to whoever was on the other end. It's a complete rebrand. But trust me, this authenticity angle could work even better for sponsorships. The socials are blowing up already. People love the redemption narrative. Thanchai emerged from the shower, towel wrapped around his waist. Overhearing the conversation, he said nothing, simply began changing into his street clothes with deliberate movements. The manager ended his call, turning to Thanchai with forced enthusiasm. Great fight. Really great. The humble champion angle is gold, absolute gold. I've already got 3 new endorsement offers, and the post-fight social numbers are insane. Thanchai met his gaze calmly. I'm not playing an angle, he said quietly. This isn't a brand strategy. The manager's smile faltered slightly. Of course. I just mean that authenticity really resonates with the audience, and I don't care if it resonates. Thanchai interrupted, his voice firm, but not unkind. I care if it's true. He finished dressing and gathered his bag, preparing to leave. The manager hovered anxiously, clearly struggling to reconcile the fighter before him with the marketable commodity he'd built his career around. There's a big after-party at Sky Bar, he said, trying a different approach. All the sponsors will be there. The press. It would really help solidify this new direction if you made an appearance. Thanchai shouldered his bag, considering the request. 6 weeks ago, he would have been the center of such gatherings, reveling in the attention, feeding his ego on the adulation of fans and the economic interests of sponsors. Not tonight, he said simply. But tell them I'm honored by their support, Thanchai added, softening his refusal. But tonight, I have somewhere more important to be. Before the manager could protest further, a knock came at the locker room door. When it opened, Somsak the Bull Chanarong stood in the doorway, his presence commanding immediate respect. Magnificent fight, the veteran said, voice carrying decades of wisdom. Your technique was pure. Your spirit was clear. Thanchai bowed slightly, offering the traditional why with genuine respect. Coming from you, those words mean everything. The two fighters regarded each other, the aging veteran who had maintained his honor through victory and defeat, and the young champion who was discovering that same path after nearly losing his way. Would you join me? Somsak asked. A simple invitation with profound implications. Thonchai nodded, understanding immediately. It would be my honor. He followed Somsak from the arena through a service exit, avoiding the press and crowds. In the humid Bangkok night, a simple car waited rather than Thonchai's usual luxury SUV. As they drove through the city's glowing streets, Somsak explained they were going to his first training gym. A humble place where neighborhood children still learned the ancient art in its purest form. That night, in a simple gym with worn equipment and threadbare mats, the world champion and the respected veteran taught a group of wide-eyed children. Not flashy techniques for social media clips, but fundamentals: balance, respect, discipline. The spiritual core that makes Muay Thai more than mere violence. When a brave young girl asked Thonchai if Chuck Norris had beaten him because he'd forgotten these foundations, the champion knelt to her level and answered with perfect honesty, "Yes, that's exactly why. He didn't beat me with age or technique alone. He beat me because he remembered what I had forgotten, that true strength comes from humility before the art." Later, as he and Somsak left the gym, Thonchai asked if the older fighter would tell Chuck Norris what had happened tonight. Somsak smiled enigmatically. "I don't need to. He already knows." "How could he? He's halfway across the world. Some lessons transcend distance," Somsak replied. "When a student truly learns, the teacher feels it, no matter how far apart they may be." And somewhere in a quiet study in Texas, Chuck Norris looked up from his book, a slight smile touching his weathered face. He couldn't have explained why, but he felt a moment of satisfaction, as if a distant bell had rung in perfect tone. He returned to his reading, content in the knowledge that some battles are won not with fists or feet, but with the quiet power of example, and that true mastery lies not in dominance, but in the humble transmission of wisdom from one generation to the next. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.